Chapter 1, The Reverse. The sight hit everyone who cared like a train. There was no warning to it. Izuku Midoriya, as far as 1A knew, had taken his own life. It wasn't a direct act of suicide, rather a blatantly suicidal action that shocked everyone so. Izuku had jumped straight into a blazing inferno to save someone, and didn't do anything as the flames consumed him. And he never looked away from his friends and allies as it happened. He was gone now. His devastated mother sobbed over her own loss, begging for her son to return. The majority of Class 1A felt the same, each one of them worsening with every worst-case scenario that popped into their heads. All except one. Iida grit his teeth as he read through one of Izuku's notebooks. The rage that was building within him was threatening to burst. Each page held a secret he had kept from them. Every painful memory and guilty feeling. When he turned the pages, the bubble became bigger, until he reached the middle. He felt a tear slip down his face as he looked over the drawings Izuku had made. A bright red suit with yellow accents and a yellow bolt on its chest. Right next to it was a description that read, "It's silly, but once I knew what his quirk was, I couldn't help but think of this. I call it the Flash." He carefully pulled the page out after making sure nothing else was written on the other side. He pinned it to a wall in his dorm room and stared at it. It felt like hours had gone by, but still he kept his eyes locked on the drawing, memorizing each and every detail, no matter how insignificant. Tears continued to slip down his face as he stared. "It's not fair. Even with this evidence, I'm afraid we're unable to do anything, Mr. Tenya." Whatever the principal said next, Iida didn't listen. His heart pounded in his ears, and the edges of his vision began to go red. "You're all useless." He stood, glaring at the principal, who eyed him in surprise. "Bakugo Katsuki is the reason Izuku is gone now. It's plain as day and you won't do anything about it. You're utterly useless." Iida. All Might, who was standing next to him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Keep your hands off me." The boy slapped his hand away and glared at him. "You're just as useless as everyone else. If you won't do something about this, then I will." With that, he left the office. He was breathing heavily through his nose as he returned to his room. Thoughts swam around his head, clouding his mind and shouting in his ears. With a shout of pure rage, Iida drove his fist through one of the walls in his room. His eyes widened as he pulled his hand back, noticing the blood on his fist. He looked around and felt something building up, something than just anger. He pulled back his other fist and punched through the wall again, quickly pulling his hand back to grab a book he'd left on his desk, and threw it into his glasses shelf, breaking it, and several of his much-needed glasses. He continued to trash his room, letting whatever primal fury he had guide his movements. Suddenly, he stopped, his eyes having landed on the drawing once again. Izuku had drawn that. He almost destroyed it. He quickly calmed down and approached it. He stared at the design again, letting an idea formulate in his mind. Izuku. He clenched his fists, which now dripped lightly with blood. "I'm no hero." Bakugo glared at his opponent. The tournament had been running smoothly so far, and now they were all here for the final event. Across from him stood Iida Tenya, Four Eyes, as he called him. But something was off about him. He glared at Bakugo with such intensity, he swore he saw his eyes turn red. As soon as they were given the signal, they charged at each other. Bakugo, using his quirk to propel himself forward, flew at his opponent, simply planning to blow him out of the ring. He didn't expect Iida to suddenly dodge down, and grab his ankle as he passed. Bakugo felt a pain shoot out from his back, as Iida pulled him back and slammed him into the ground. The taller boy wasted no time in slamming his foot down on his face, before stepping back. Bakugo shot up and shook his head, the adrenaline having numbed some of the pain. "You'll pay for that, bastard. And you, LL pay for what you did to Izuku," Usonovabitch. Iida rushed forward, jumping and slamming his knees into Katsuki's chest. The ash blonde flew back, sliding against the floor. The crowd began to murmur as Iida continued the very one-sided battle. "You're no hero, Bakugo. You're just a fucking villain in the making, and everyone knows it." Bakugo glared at Iida, the anger inside him boiling over. "You keep your filthy mouth shut, fucker. And WHO gives a shit about that useless Deku. If he's dead then good." The crowd went silent. Nobody spoke another word as the realization dawned on the ash blonde. Iida smirked, satisfied with how the bastard outed himself. "You know. I used to have hope about this place. But seeing you here, knowing you're a fucking monster." Iida removed his glasses, dropping them to the floor and crushing them under his foot. "It makes me realize just how useless this place really is. If they're gonna let you in, they might as well start training villains while they're at it." Iida reached up to grab the zipper of his jumpsuit, and began dragging it down. "I'm tired of seeing evil deeds go unpunished. I'm tired of waiting for some useless, so-called, hero to bring justice to people like you. But most of all..." He reached behind himself, just below the back of his neck, and pulled a bright yellow mask over his face. "I'm tired of playing by the rules." He discarded the jumpsuit, revealing a bright yellow costume, with 3 thick red jagged lines on his forearms and waist. And on his chest was a bright red lightning bolt, proudly displayed for the world to see. Before Bakugo could react, Iida ran forward and punched him in the nose, breaking it and sending him back. Without waiting, he ran up and stomped down on his right hand, breaking it. Bakugo shouted in pain and cradled his hand. Iida looked at the horrified crowd, stopping when his eyes landed on a familiar-looking face. Inko Midoriya. Bakugo. He looked down at his opponent with a sneering smirk, pointing a thumb back towards the crowd. "Look what you did." Bakugo could barely see. His vision was foggy from the pain, but they soon focused on the horrified face of Inko. Suddenly the weight of his decisions fell on him, and he felt sick. "I hope you suffer." With those last words, Iida ran off, leaving Bakugo crumpled on the floor. He stared at his hands, the horror finally setting in. "What have I done?" Katsuki looked at his bleeding hand as his vision faded. "What have I done?" Izuku. Chapter 2, Resolve. Katsuki looked up from the sink and stared at his reflection. He checked every inch of his hair, wanting to make sure the black dye had gotten all over. He gripped the sink tightly, glaring at his reflection, wanting to strangle it. "Hey, brat. Are you done in there?" The now Ravenet sighed as he dried his hair, and stepped out of the bathroom, brushing past his mother and locking himself in his room. He sat down on his bed, lost in thoughts of regret. Iida was right about him. He was just a villain in the making. That's why he quit UA. Being in a regular school wasn't any better though. Everyone knew about him, and that meant that they knew what he did, how he acted and such. So he stood alone a lot, not caring if anyone wanted to talk to him or not. Bullies were another issue. He'd been suspended several times for how he treated them, and was almost thrown in jail for putting 3 in body casts. But they learned their lessons, he hoped. A very shaky sigh escaped his lips before he caught sight of a book he never thought he'd see again. The King James Bible. A scowl formed on his face. He thought he burned the damn thing years ago, but apparently not. He grabbed it and flicked through the pages, gritting his teeth as a flash of memory came to him. That's when he dropped the book. He stared at his hands in horror. This was Izuku's old Bible. Guilt filled him once again and tears slowly began to build up. He sobbed to himself, quietly wishing the earth would swallow him up. He'll always be your friend, no matter what. Wiping his tears away, Katsuki looked up, looking through his ceiling. If you're real. I need help. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I was a horrible person. I hurt someone who looked up to me, and I can't," he choked on another sob. "I'm lost. I'm lost and I can't find any way to." His sobs could be heard from outside his room, and his mother couldn't help but cry silently with her son. The moon shone brightly as the clouds parted, and rays of gentle light entered Katsuki's room. From the corner of his eye, he saw it. A t-shirt he'd forgotten existed. He turned to face it, and another memory returned to him. "Kachin. Look what I got you. Hey. It's way too big for me, you idiot." I know, but you'll grow big so you can wear it one day. And look." Katsuki held the shirt up, taking in the large skull emblem placed in the center. He stared long and hard, when suddenly it clicked. So many people were out there, and a lot of them were just like him, monsters. Monsters that hurt innocent people, that tear them apart from the inside or out. A new resolve found itself within him, and his decision was made. All of them. Every single criminal, from the biggest villain to the most insignificant of bullies. All of them needed to be given their due. No. They needed to be punished. 25 Chapter 3, Freedom. Snow fell. The coffee shop was the only warm place Kirishima could think of coming to, even if places like this made his stomach churn. He hated places like this now. Too sweet. Too warm. Just like Izuku. At least Tetsu enjoyed himself, the hot chocolate he bought himself serving to warm him up further, despite already wearing a thick green jacket and yellow beni. Kirishima on the other hand, stared down at the table, his mind stuck on what had happened in only a single month. A frustrated growl came from him, catching his friend's attention. "Hey, what's up?" Kirishima looked up at him and shook his head. "I'm just thinking. Everything's just falling apart." Tetsu looked down at his cup, a serious look coming over him. First Izuku disappears, then Iida does. Whatever he's doing now, and Bakugo. Kirishima didn't know whether to feel depressed that his best friend had quit, or mad that he didn't get to lay one good punch in before he did. Katsuki was his friend, sure, but after learning what he did to Izuku for several years, he just wanted to slap him for his wrongdoings. But what else could be done now? He's punishing himself more than you ever could. Kirishima looked at his friend, who sipped his chocolate calmly. He held a thoughtful look, one he'd never seen before. Anyone who didn't care would have continued in UA, but he didn't. If he quit, he must hate himself on a level we never could. He sees the wrongs he's done, and how he hurt his friend, so now he's taken his own dream away. Kirishima could only stare at him in surprise. Where did such an observation come from, and with such a wise way to put it? Tetsu chuckled and scratched the back of his head. "Sorry, I just yeah." They laughed, Kirishima feeling lighter now. If he really regrets it, I guess I could visit him. Talk things out and, suddenly, and without warning, a car drove right through the glass wall of the coffee shop, sending them, and several others, flying. Without missing a beat, just as several men stumbled out, guns in hand. Kirishima and Tetsu wasted no time in pulling any injured civilians to safety. Suddenly, several gunshots rang out as police arrived. Fuck. Kirishima's mind began to race as everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. Several civilians were crushed under the car, some managed to escape while others were too injured to move. Then time came to a crawl as one of the thugs turned around, aiming his shotgun at a little girl who had been crying the entire time. He couldn't breathe. He needed to do something, but he'd be risking arrest and probably expulsion for using his quirk, but if he didn't, an innocent life would be lost. When the little girl opened her eyes, they locked with his. He made his decision. When the thug fired, he was met with a bright yellow wall. His eyes traveled up, meeting the very angry gaze of Kirishima, who whipped his hand down his abdomen, causing several shotgun pellets to drop to the floor. Fuck me. Kurishima's fist made contact with the thug's face, sending him into the car windshield. 3 of the 6 thugs turned to him, guns raised and ready to fire. His eye widened as he looked at the crowd behind him, and realized he wouldn't be able to protect all of them. Without warning, a blur of green and yellow slammed into one of them, sending them into their partners and alerting the rest of the remaining 2 thugs. Tetsu stood tall, revealing that he had pulled his Benny Dune over his eyes, 2 pre-made holes serving to let him see. His right hand was covered with a glowing red metal, having pushed the entirety of his quirk into it. The 2 thugs could barely react as he rushed forward, punching them back and into the waiting arms of a pro hero. One of them got up, and hoping to catch the yellow sweater-wearing boy, he ran at him and swung his fist. Kirishima turned his head to him, and time slowed as the fist made contact with his jaw, and shattered on the spot. Wordlessly, Kirishima lifted the man and threw him across the room and through the cafe wall. A gun clicked and raised up to his chest, but he quickly wrapped his hand around the barrel as the trigger was pulled, muffling the shot and crushing the barrel before slamming the man into the floor. Kirishima looked around, finding that he and Tetsutsu, who kept his beanie mask on, had drawn a small crowd outside the cafe. The pros looked at them in disbelief, and suddenly their eyes narrowed. "You two, stay where you are. You're under arrest." Kurishima's eyes widened. "What? We just saved. Get down on the ground and put your hands behind your head." Tetsu backed up, unconsciously raising his fists, and pouring all of his power into his right hand, making it glow brightly once again. "No way, man. No way. We just saved these people. We did your job while you stood out there like a bunch of idiots." Kirishima took a step forward, baring his sharp teeth and activating his quirk. "Yeah. If you're gonna arrest us, you'll have to put us down." What was he saying? They were students at U.A. The worst thing that would happen to them would have been a suspension and extra work. Unlike you, we actually care about these people. You were standing there doing nothing. What kind of useless heroes are you? The crowd began to murmur and soon they began to shout. The pros could only look around, dumbfounded. The crowd was actually agreeing with them. "Dude, let's get out of here." Kirishima nodded, and both of them slammed the fists down, creating a cloud of smoke that blanketed enough for them to run. After several minutes of aimless running, both boys ended up in Kurishima's house. They quickly discarded their sweaters, not wanting to be recognized by anyone. "Oh man, we're in deep shit now. What the hell are we gonna do, Kirishima?" "Dude, calm down. They only saw my face. You still had your Benny mask thing on. You're in the clear." Tetsu calmed down somewhat. He was right. His face was covered enough to not be recognized, but he realized that Kirishima didn't have anything other than his sweater. "Aw man, but what about you? Everyone saw you face, dude." Kirishima grit his teeth. He was right. He didn't even pull his hood up to, at the very least, try to cover his face. But something inside told him not to care. It told him to feel proud. "So, as far as I'm concerned, we were doing what we've always wanted to do. We saved those people, and stopped the bad guys." A wide toothy smile came to his face. If that's something they don't like, to hell with them. Iida was right. Heroes aren't people with departments, P.R. firms, cash and merchandise. Real heroes don't care about being number one. Real heroes go out there and just do it. And you know what? I don't care if anyone from U.A. doesn't like it, because I did. I felt alive. Free. Like I wasn't trapped in some cage for 3 years, waiting to be let out. Locking eyes with his friend, Kirishima cemented his decision. No turning back now. I'm quitting UA. He didn't expect Tetsu to grin and nod. I can't say I can stop you. Besides, we make a great team. A small, barely noticeable blush formed on his face, and he smiled. It felt good to just be a hero without permission. Yeah, it did. And what was that you did with your quirk? That was so cool. They spent the next hour talking and planning things out, stopping when both their stomachs growled loudly. As they sat and ate, they watched the news, wondering if anything would be, at the least, hinted at their actions. Eventually, they got what they were waiting for. Witnesses were able to provide some descriptions of the vigilantes, describing one as indestructible, sustaining a point-blank shotgun blast to the chest, as well uncovering the barrel of a gun with his bare hand as it fired. His partner could only be described as a man with an iron fist. Laughter erupted from both of them as they celebrated. They were recognized, and even Tetsu got a nickname out of it. Hee, Iron Fist. I like that. It really suits you, ya know. Real manly. Kirishima grinned, noticing the dust of pink on his cheeks. Thank man. But about you. What happens next? You can't really go around like this. People will know who you are, and if you're ever up against a villain, they'll use your family against you. The smile died on Kirishima's face. He leaned forward, hand on his chin as he thought. You can't help others if you're outed. I'm not afraid of that. Tetsu looked at him, confusion written on his face. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because I have been anointed to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed. He looked at his friend, a grin on his face. Luke 4:18. I didn't know you read the Bible. It's something that always gave me motivation. It helped me realize that I wanted to be a hero and save people, even if I couldn't save myself. Sacrifices have to be made for the greater good, even if it's too great. Kirishima stood and made his way to his bathroom, tossing his tattered shirt off as he entered. Reaching beneath the sink, he pulled out an electric razor, and without a second thought, cut his hair down. When he stepped out, he sported a simple military haircut. It isn't much, but it's as good a disguise as any. He sat down once again. Tetsu unconsciously reached out and felt his friend's hair, smiling lightly as he did. Well, I like it. Kinda like a new beginning. Kirishima smiled, anxious to see what the future held. Yeah. Look out world, the Iron Fist and Huh. He thought for a moment, and his mind wandered to what he said earlier. He felt caged in UA but not like an animal, but like a prisoner, waiting an eternity to be free. But now he was. He felt more free than he ever did before, and he would never allow himself to be caged again. Luke Cage. Tetsu smiled at the name. I like it. Yeah. Look out world. Iron Fist and Luke Cage are here. And we aren't going anywhere. Chapter 4, The Ones You Saw Coming. A yellow blur ran down the road, dodging cars and civilians. A group of drug dealers didn't know what to think when, in a split second, they ended up tied up and beaten. When asked, the only name they gave was Flash. Across the city, news of an ultra-violent vigilante began to surface, making headlines with just how brutally he'd, quite literally, tear apart criminals, and startling the criminal underground into pulling back. If there were any survivors, each of them gave the same name. The Punisher. Meanwhile, in two local neighborhoods, both ripe with crime, whispers of an indestructible powerhouse began to spread. Tales of his completely selfless actions and straightforward heroism caused admiration. He wore no mask, making him easy to identify, and simply went by the name of Luke Cage. He didn't work alone, having a constant partner in the Iron Fist, whose skills in grounded combat, while sloppy, gained him much respect from those who liked to keep their stores and homes intact. Aizawa glared hard at the news. Street-level vigilantes. The constant feeling of irritation grew within him, as he was pretty sure he knew who was responsible for these actions. I swear, when I get my hands on them, I'm gonna. Please refrain from hurting our former students, Aizawa. Yagi spoke. He looked at the reports, a small sense of pride finding its way into his heart. What those four were doing was very illegal and very dangerous, especially with Bakugo, who left the underworld shaking in fear that they might be next to go 6 feet under. We simply need to bring them in, speak to them, and if necessary, incarcerate them. That's the problem right there. We can't. Snipe said. I mean, we're not allowed. Endeavor tried getting her hands on that Cage Kid, and his popularity dropped faster than the stock market. Not only that, but as soon as Iron Fist arrived, civilians began chanting their names. HMPH, that explains his behavior recently. So mainstream heroes can't touch them or they get hated on. Aizawa groaned, wanting to slam his head into the wall. Guess the underground heroes have to do this. Yeah, about that. Yagi scratched the back of his head, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. Several have tried, but the public has sided with the vigilantes, and they refuse to turn them in. And even young Bakugo is too dangerous to get close to. Every time they've tried they're met with extreme resistance. Perfect. So we're just going to let them run around and inspire other idiots to join them. Mike put an arm around his friend, trying and failing to lighten his mood. That's another thing. They've put other vigilantes behind bars. Anyone jumping in recklessly gets thrown in front of a police station. Mike showed them articles of other, more reckless and very unstable, vigilantes being caught and arrested, each giving statements, but mostly complaining, about being arrested. HMPH. Just know that I'm arresting them if I see them on patrol. The public can bitch and moan if they want to. With that, Aizawa left the room, leaving the rest of the UA staff to speak about their admired vigilantes' problem. It was probably no secret to himself, or the people passing by, that he was not alright in the head. Oh, who was he kidding? He was mental, but who was looking into his brain to guarantee it? His father did that already, but figuratively. LSD was one hell of a drug. He stopped and looked up at the dilapidated building. He counted 5 stories. He cracked his neck and knuckles before walking forward. He hummed casually, kicking down the boarded-up door, not caring much if his all-white suit got dirty. Pushing the rest of the planks out of the way, he made sure everything was on him. Suit, mask, billy club, moon darts. A gun cocking made him act, throwing one of his darts in the direction of the sound. The thug dropped the gun with a yelp, and doubled over as soon as a powerful punch met his stomach. He let him fall as he threw up, pulling his club out as another thug ran down the stairs. Hey! Who the hell are you? Before he could reach for his gun, a white club struck his nose. The one you see coming. He kicked the thug back onto the stairs, breaking them and leaving him a heap in splinters. He made his way upstairs, catching sight of another grunt, and slamming his club into his ankle. A loud snap could be heard, and as he fell, the man in white suddenly lifted him and threw him behind, and onto the staircase rails, breaking his spine. On instinct, he brought the club up, catching a bullet at the expense of the club. Hearing a click, he quickly aimed it at the thug, whose gun was jammed. His eyes widened as the club exploded, and a grappling hook slammed into his face, cracking his teeth and nose. These cost money, damn it. And it's not like I have a job. 3rd floor. He reached into his pocket and casually flicked a crescent dart upwards, stabbing a thug, who was looking over the railings, under his chin. The thug stumbled forward, holding his mouth in pain until a kick sent him flying through the railings and down the stairs. HMPH. Punks. Hey. I was sleeping here. A large, muscular man walked out of another room, and the man in white wastes no time in running up and punching him. He looked up in disbelief as the thug growled in anger and grabbed him by the head with one hand. He felt himself get lifted, and pressure was applied to his head. Thinking quickly, he pulled out 2 crescent darts, and stabbed them into the man's chest, forcing him to release the man in white. A kick to the crotch forced him to double over, and without wasting time, the man removed his coat and wrapped it around his head before throwing him out of a window. He watched as he fell and smashed into a car. A few broken bones. Nothing a few months in a body cast won't fix. Now then, 4th floor. 3 thugs awaited him as he rolled his sleeves up. He grinned and kicked one on the stomach, forcing him to throw up. He dodged an incoming punch from the 2nd thug and grabbed his arm before twisting it. He kicked him into the 3rd one, sending them crashing down. He casually walked up and stomped on their heads to make sure they stayed down before moving on. 5th floor. He heard sobs from the end of the hallway, and made his way down. Without looking, his right hand shot out and grabbed a baseball bat that had come from another room. Thanks. I needed one of these. The last thug held a gun to an innocent girl's head, and waited for whoever it was to come through the door. Which happened. Standing there, dressed in a dirty white suit, and holding bloodied baseball bat. Hi. I'm Mr. Knight. The thug pulled the hammer back on the gun. Well, Mr. Knight, I'm pretty sure my gun has more range than your bat. Mr. Knight hummed and looked at the girl. But I like this bat. Besides, you owe me a new billy club. And you can't kill me. He pointed the bat at the girl. You can kill her, it's true. But what saves your life after she's dead? The thug swallowed hard. Everyone thinks she's already dead. That loss is accepted. But have you accepted yours? Are you ready to die today? The thug blinked. He shook slightly as Mr. Knight walked closer. You could use that gun on her. But she's the only thing keeping you alive. Make your call. Slowly, the thug pushed the hammer back, and clicked the safety on. He placed in the gloved hand of the masked man, and was knocked out cold with a whack to the head. Kneeling down, Knight untied the girl and made sure she was alright. Hello Eri. Are you alright? The girl nodded, not meeting his masked gaze. My name's Mr. Knight. Don't worry, the police will arrive to take you home. I don't have a home. He ran a gentle hand through her hair. Don't worry. You'll have one sooner than you think. She looked at him, and she outstretched her hand to feel his face. It's a mask. Did they hurt you? She shook her head and gave him a confused look. It's not a mask. It's your face. He chuckled at her. Clever girl. He stood up and walked over to the doorway. I have to go. I'm not exactly a legal hero. But do tell them. All of the pro heroes. If they see me coming. Run. Eri blinked, and he was gone. Police sirens wailed in the distance as a smile made a way to her face. Shoto held his side in pain, blood slowly spilling out of his mouth and onto the floor. No matter what, he couldn't escape these, so-called, training sessions with Endeavor. They were beginning to get to him, and even if he wished for it, until he could leave the house, he was stuck with them. A part of him screamed to make it all end, but he ignored it. His mother wouldn't have wanted him to quit like that. He had to push through and come out on top, even if it was with the worst of battle scars. Izuku. Probably one of the good things in his miserable life, aside from his siblings and mother. He was gone now, and for all anyone knew, dead. It didn't help that his classmates were suddenly dropping from school one by one. It left a growing emptiness inside him. A fist slamming into his face, and sending him crashing against the wall, brought him back to the reality of his situation. Focus, you imbecile. I'm not training you to daydream. Shoto shook his head and picked himself up once more, bringing his fists up and feeling anger bubble inside him. Again. He lunged at Endeavor, throwing everything he could at him. Once again his mind went elsewhere, to a happier place. He remembered when he first met Izuku, and how much he didn't like him. He felt something pulling him towards the Greenette, although he never got the chance to actually speak with him. Disappointed filled him however, and he knew he lost the opportunity to make a genuine friend. Once again, reality hit him like a train, and he doubled over gasping. Pathetic. I can't believe you still think you could go on without using your other half. You'll never make it to know one like this. Angry and frustrated, Endeavor kicked his son down. I still have hope for you, though. You'll grow out of this ridiculous phase, and start showing me the respect I've earned. Shoto screamed in his head for him to shut up. He tried crawling back into his mind, trying to figure out just where his life would have led if he formally met Midoriya Izuku. The next thing his father said finally pushed it, however. And when that day come, you'll forget that useless bitch of a mother, and become a real man worthy of my name. Something snapped inside of Shoto, and years of torment rushed back into his mind, fueling a wellspring of pure rage. Shut the fuck up. Before the older Todoroki found himself frozen in place, with ice quickly traveling up his body, and encasing everything but his face. You don't speak about my mother, you son of a bitch. Endeavor struggled to move as his son quickly limped to stand in front of him, eyes full of pure hatred aimed at him. You don't get to dream about a future. Not one where you're satisfied. You deserve to die, and I should put an icicle through your head and get it done. Shoto suddenly found himself grinning and chuckling. But I won't. I can't. You'd win talk easily like this, and I can't have that. Shoto. When I get out of here, you're going to be long gone. He grabbed his father's face, giving him a toothy grin. And after that, I'll expose you for what you are. The world will see what kind of a monster you are. I'll show them what's behind your false heroic mask, you bastard. My actions will make them see how you broke me. How you tore my family apart and spat on them. I'll succeed you, but not as a hero. I'll succeed you in the category you deserve to be in, villain scum. Shoto brought his right fist back, coating it in the coldest ice he'd ever made, and slammed it into his father's face, knocking him out. He stood there for a minute before leaving the room. A weight was lifted off his shoulders, and a decision solidified in his mind, as he made his way to his room. He began to pack a single bag, and stopped to look for something. He wasn't really willing to wait to put his plan into motion, so that meant making a costume was out of the picture. He suddenly remembered something from his mother's room, and quickly rushed over, opening the closet to find a long, blue parka. Slowly, he reached out and grabbed it, feeling it for a moment before slipping it on. He felt a true comforting warmth he hadn't felt in years. He clenched his fists and forced himself not to cry. Quickly, he wrote his sister a note and slipped it under her door before quickly leaving. He looked back at the house and narrowed his eyes with a smirk as Endeavor came to mind. I'll have you soon. You cunt. Pulling the parka hood over his head, Shoto walked away with a smirk, and a new purpose. But first, to get her out. Chapter 5, Punisher, Rest. He'd been stupid that night. He was a smart kid, but he was just that, a kid. But despite the bullet holes, the knife scars, bruises and cracked ribs, he couldn't help but feel as if he'd won the lottery. A month ago, Katsuki Bakugo had left you. In shame. He spoke in the heat of the moment, and he almost meant it. He blamed someone else for so long he never stood back and looked in the mirror. He was the driving force behind Izuku's suicidal heroics. He was the one that pushed an unhealthy rivalry to blossom. He told his only real friend to kill himself. He wasn't a hero, nor was he pretending to be one. Not anymore. A month ago, one night, Katsuki Bakugo had found a gift Izuku had gotten him when they were kids. A simple black t-shirt with a large skull adorning the front of its chest. That night he made a vow he'd keep until the end. That night he'd packed no bags, took whatever money he had, and didn't turn back. The skull was something he wore casually. There wasn't a shirt in his drawers that didn't have one. But this one was special to him. And he would make sure it was special to any scumbag who survived to spread the word. The Punisher would never stop. As he finished up wrapping the gauze around his forearm, the unmistakable sound of engines in his safe house. Iida fucking Tenya. He growled, turning to look out the bathroom door, and at the yellow figure standing outside. The Flash. The Punisher. I see you're doing well. Katsuki chuckled, not missing the sarcasm in the, now surprisingly, semi-warped voice. He noticed a few other details too, like how he couldn't really see him clearly. He was just a yellow blur, with its head in the shadows and glowing red eyes. That's a new look for you. The taller boy grunted in response. I took a look at his notes. I'm currently vibrating at accurate speeds to cause visual and auditory distortions. Katsuki gave a genuine laugh as his response. The yellow blur stepped aside as Katsuki stepped into the room. He watched as his former peer got in bed, trying to sleep. His costume design wasn't yellow. Iida heard him mumble. I'll change it, just not yet. He stopped his trick and slipped the mask off. Katsuki sighed and sat up, groaning slightly in frustration. All right. Why are you really here? Iida's piercing eyes gazed around the small space. You have to stop. Katsuki scoffed. Or what? You'll arrest me. The shorter male stood, ignoring the small ache on his side. You aren't exactly doing your thing legally either. At least I don't sink to the criminal's level. Katsuki laughed in his face, stopping to groan in pain. In case you haven't forgotten, Mr. Class President, we're already criminals. He stood, glaring at his former classmate. Besides, I'm doing more for the people than any of you half-measure extras, and you know it. Iida said nothing and clenched his fists. You don't like that though. Katsuki smirked. I know you don't. The Flash said nothing as he placed his mask back on and began blurring himself. You better watch yourself, Punisher. And get the fuck out, Musutafu. The shorter male groaned as he laid down, ignoring the annoying gust of wind as Flash left. He stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, until finally sleep took him. War Journal Entry 20. Packed what little I have. Need to move away from Musutafu before that yellow bastard causes me more trouble. I'm going to Osaka. Word from one of my targets is that the fucker who killed Izuku is there. Don't know how, but I'll find him, and I'm going to take my time with him. Chapter 6. Punisher, Glass Bath. Katsuki couldn't have been happier with his new base of operations. It might have taken more than a week, and several power generators, but he'd finally moved in. The vast expanse of the train stations all over Japan were more than enough to accommodate both he and his arsenal, as well as whatever else he might have needed. Fresh light bulbs illuminated every inch of his new home, and the boy sat in front of a police scanner, journal and pencil in hand. War Journal Entry Number 21. Got to Osaka almost 3 weeks ago and killed a dozen pockets of drug dealers in the first 6 days alone. There's still a lot of work to do, but there's a silver lining to this. The new base is growing on me quick. Plenty of space, and plenty of exits and fail-safes coming along nicely as well. I've been sitting next to the scanner for almost 2 hours now. Patience is something I've learned to use, especially because of the need to plan. I rushed into this crusade without one, but I'm learning. His writing was interrupted by the scanner. Attention all units, we have a break-in at the recycling plant on Hideo and Araki Street. All available units please respond. Katsuki stood, setting his journal down. At least now he had something to do. All units be advised. Suspects are dangerous. Be on the lookout for a scarred individual with a blue flame quirk. His eyes widened and he looked at the scanner. Scarred individual with blue flames. It was a 1 in a million chance, but maybe he actually found him, and so soon no less. The police hid behind any cover they could. Most of them were either fired to a crisp, or stabbed a dozen times. Dabi couldn't care how many more died, as long as they got the hell out of there, and soon. I'll cover you. Try getting as far as you can to the back, got it? Toga nodded and readied herself. Just a few feet away, a SWAT team began to advance. Slow bastards. A giant blue ball of flame shot out, and a blur shot out behind it, jumping over to a nearby staircase. Dabi quickly followed, narrowly avoiding a few shots. They ran past the glass crusher, which continued to turn. The noise wasn't pleasant in any way, but that was the least of their worries. All they had to do now was run into the office just on the other end of the catwalk, get to the roof, and they were home free. Without warning, a part of the roof ahead of them exploded, stopping them in their tracks. Knock knock. The dust cleared enough for the notorious White Skull to be seen, and a gunshot to ring out. Dabi had felt pain before. He'd taken beatings and stabbings. Hell, he'd even been shot before, but he still fell, holding his injured leg as Toga shouted his name. He barely had time to register her voice before a splatter of blood hit him. Toga. He froze, eyes now wide and in horror. She had a gaping hole in her chest, with the twin barrels of a sawn-off shotgun visible on the other side. She wobbled for a second before hitting the floor like a sack of potatoes. His gaze wandered up, briefly locking onto the White Skull before moving up to the owner's face. War Journal. Angry eyes met mine. He was on me in an instant. He must have forgotten he had a quirk, but that worked for me. I was wearing heavy armor this time, so I wasn't stunned when my back hit the metal floor. I took a few punches before I managed to get my feet under him, and kicked him off. The raggedy fuck flew over me and I was up in an instant. I shot my quirk out to stop a wall of flame from hitting me, and leapt forward. We slammed into each other and held each other by the collar before we started trading blows. My knee shot out and hit his injured leg. Stupid of me, really. Adrenaline was pumping so he could barely feel it. I aimed for his neck, stunning him for a moment before kicking him away. The dead bitch's knife was in his hand, and he started swinging blindly. I could almost see tears in his eyes, but I couldn't have cared less. We stumbled onto the catwalk, next to the noisy glass crusher. Beneath us, heroes and cops watched as we danced back and forth. He swung and cut me. I blocked and punched him. He caught me off guard when he remembered to use his quirk again, and pinned me down. I was more than certain I was gonna die. Too bad he forgot about my arms. Dabi grabbed him by the neck, raising the knife close to his face. You're fucking dead. I'm going to fucking gut you. Katsuki smirked. Let me put you out of my misery. Dabi flew back. The sudden explosion made his ears ring and vision blur, but they cleared up quick. Something slammed into his gut, winding him and sending him onto his back. Numb pain suddenly came to the back of his head while his nose ached. A heavy weight set itself on his chest and shoulders, and his mind decided to clear up then to feel several punches delivered. Punisher stood quickly, gripping the front of his shirt and lifting him before throwing him across the catwalk before staking over to him. The pro-heroes and police stood still, like living statues that could only observe. Dabi got on his knees, groaning as the Punisher grabbed him by the hair, and slammed his face into catwalk. White-hot pain was all he felt as he was lifted and then slammed, face first, into window after window of the nearby office. Punisher lifted the villain's head up, and pulled out a knife. As he held it up to his neck, he looked at his mangled face, savoring the pain he had inflicted on him. Then he froze as his hand came up, and pushed the knife closer to his flesh. Do it. A sneer came to his face, and his anger grew. He wanted to die now of all times. No. You're not dying just yet. He pulled his hand away and put the knife away. Punisher gripped Dabi's head with both hands and slammed his face against the few shards of glass still attached to the window frame. You're gonna learn about real pain first. The villain screamed in pain. You're gonna learn about loss. He flew and landed near Toga. He sputtered and coughed, stopping when a picture was shoved close to his face. He recognized the kid in it. The one with a green lion's mane. He killed him. Every morning, for a month and even now, I wake up and try to look for him. But then I remember what happened. Just like you will. He felt himself being lifted. Punisher held him high above his head, and walked closer to the glass crusher. You're gonna remember me. War Journal. I threw him in and watched him swim in a pool of glass. He screamed and begged and I only stood there, knowing he'd survive. I could deal with him later. 25 Chapter 7, Intermissions. I'm too lazy to work on my own. Anyway, here's more of the ever-elusive Flash and some Aizawa. Nana 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 nana. Yellow cloth fell to the ground. Iida sat down next to it, tired and worn. 40 crimes in an hour was well worth the pain and blood. He wasn't so sure he could stomach chugging juice and stuffing his face every other hour though. And he couldn't bother with good at the moment. Despite his speed and practiced precision, quirks were still a thing, and more than one managed to land on him. Luckily nothing serious. The hot water stung the cuts and gashes, but it cleaned them out. The bleeding eventually stopped, and Iida wasted no time in stitching himself up. He flinched and winced, but grit his teeth and got it over with, and when he was done, he didn't move for almost an hour. He stared at the lump of yellow and red cloth on the floor outside the bathroom. He helped people like he always wanted, but there was something missing from it all. He knew it too. That's why the colors were inverted. He felt like less of a hero, and just like some punk kid with a costume, and a useful quirk. He sighed and laid down on the floor, next to the yellow and red fabric. He was tired. He didn't know if he knew what to do next. So he closed his eyes, and let his mind wander. Bats. Aizawa didn't have a solid opinion on them, other than they exist, but they always made their way into his mind every few years. Their stigma was used to be that of vampires, then to dark flying rodents. They were really just dogs with wings. This is stupid. Crawling out of his sleeping bag, he paced around his home. He had a brief neighbor as a child who was afraid of bats, but at the same time was more than interested in them. He never met someone so confusing, but he silently thought that they dealt with their fears. Fear. Something others thought him immune to, but always plagued him. He was afraid of becoming a hero. Afraid when he saved his first civilian. Afraid when he fought and defeated his first villain. And he was more than afraid when he watched the problem child be swallowed by that sea of flames. For several nights, days and afternoons, if he ever dreamt, it was always about Izuku. Every dream would see him fail in saving his student, and watch helplessly as he burned. And then he would wake up, shaking and in tears. He felt like a father who lost his child, and he was as confused and distraught as one, even if he couldn't, or didn't want to, show it. And now the rest of his children were leaving him. Iida had become a speeding vigilante, too fast and clever to catch. Bakugo had turned into a mass-murdering psychopath vigilante, and the police refused to even entertain the idea of arresting him. Kirishima and Tetsu were small-time vigilantes that, while only operating in 2 neighborhoods, couldn't be touched without public outcry, and the hero community at large would rather avoid the people's hate. And Shoto had gone missing, leaving his father behind in a block of ice, and an entire hospital covered in ice, frost, and snow. He knew others would follow, and they would be accepted. So what could he do? A window smashed. Squeaks and flaps rang around his home. His mind wandered back to his neighbor, an elderly man built like a brick wall, with a voice that seemed to hold every ounce of authority in the world. Bruce was his name, and even though Izawa knew him for a brief time, he felt some strange connection to him. Like the secret puzzle piece he never knew he had. His eyes went to the bat flapping around his ceiling, watching as it landed on the fan, and hung upside down. They locked eyes, and a grin worked its way onto his lips. I could have been called a hero. I helped people because that's what my parents would have wanted. I lost them when I was your age, kid. But I still remember their smiles and how they made me feel safe. That's what heroes should do. Bruce was afraid of bats. Time to share that fear with the rest of the underworld. Batzawa.